So hi, folks. So this is the third week of our sermon series on the season of creation. And 2 weeks ago, on the feast day of St. Francis and our pet blessing, I preached on the creation of animals and our relationship to them. Then last week, Jeff preached on the creation of plants and the amazing diversity and our relationship to them and the earth. And actually next week, Jeff's going to be preaching on the cosmos. But this week, I'm preaching on human beings as part of creation's story. And I'm also continuing our Thanksgiving attitude of gratitude by acknowledging some very special human beings. Now, normally around this time of year, we do a service of appreciation for emergency services and first responders. And this year, we're extending our gratitude and appreciation for all frontline workers in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're including nurses and doctors and personal support workers and essential employees of all kinds, from grocery store clerks to truck drivers and farmers who keep the food coming into the city, bus and subway drivers, folks who clean long-term care homes. So many folks, all of them, many people who cannot work from home, who go into work every day at some risk to themselves, often because they have no choice, and they're keeping things going. And I want all those folks to know we see you, we appreciate you, and we thank you. See, Thanksgiving isn't just a day. Gratitude should be a way of living. And I'm very grateful for the folks who, quite frankly, have kept our society going for these past few months. And I don't even want to think about how much worse things could have been without them. I actually want to give a brief shout out to one particular member of the Toronto Police Services, Constable Danielle Boitneau, who has for the past 9 years been Toronto Police's LGBTQ2S liaison officer, and she's moving that from that position to another position in the police service. And I've worked with Danielle for the past couple of years on a community consultative committee, and I want to personally thank her for her service in that capacity, making it easier for the LGBTQ2S community to engage with the police. And I also want to welcome Constable Carmen Wong as the new liaison officer. You know the old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child? It takes a village or a whole community working together to create the kind of society we all want to live in. It takes people who need people are the luckiest. Sorry. I thought I was channeling Barbra Streisand for a second. Don't worry, that's over. But I love the lyrics. People who need people are the luckiest people in the world. And then it goes on, it says, we're children, needing other children, and yet letting a grown-up pride hide all the need inside, acting more like children than children. It's true. People are both the most wonderful and the most horrible things in this world. I once preached a sermon on creation years ago, in which I suggested that human beings were the pinnacle of God's creation. And my late wife, Anne, confronted me afterwards, literally in the car on the way home, and basically told me that that was one of the stupidest things she'd ever heard me say. She said it nicer than that, but that's what she meant. And I was kind of offended, but then I thought about it some, and I realized she was probably right, not that I'd admit it. But you know what? When I read the story of creation and when I contemplate the history of humanity, I am not absolutely certain that the creation of human beings was an entirely unmixed blessing. And in fact, God has wondered about this too. It's recorded in Genesis 6 as part of the story of Noah and the ark, that God looked at humankind and found that we had screwed up so badly that God actually regretted making us. And Janet was telling me the other night about some horrible situation in the news, and I muttered, well, that should go nicely with my sermon on why people are the worst. And she said, you can't say that, we're Christians. And I said, yeah, we're just as bad as all the rest, which is not really the main point of the sermon, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind. People can be dreadful. And people can also be incredibly kind and thoughtful and loving and self-sacrificing and generally wonderful too. Now, the passage that Kathy read us comes from the 11th chapter of Paul's letter to the Hebrews, in which we're told about people who lived out their faith throughout the Bible. And it's sometimes been called the Hebrews Hall of Faith, because of all the biblical names that the author brings up as basically heroes of the faith. This chapter is the Marvel's Avengers portion of the Bible, you know, the movie where literally dozens of superheroes assemble to protect the good and vanquish evil, you know, like Iron Man and Captain America and Wonder Woman and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Rahab. Okay, those last four aren't Marvel heroes, they're biblical heroes. But you know what makes them heroes? It's not that they were perfect. In fact, for most of these biblical characters, if you look too closely at them, you'll find stories of hatred and disobedience and envy and violence in their histories. And sometimes they failed and they messed up big time. They didn't always do what was right. All of them made mistakes, and some of them made really big mistakes. And even when they did great things, it was because God helped them and gave them strength, not because they were necessarily so great. These faithful people weren't heroes because of their perfect lives. They were heroes because of their faith and trust in God, their dependence on God, even when the world was crashing down on them. They trusted that no matter what happened around them, no matter how it looked, God would be with them. And these heroes of the faith saw faith as a verb, a spiritual activity that allowed them to trust even when it wasn't easy, because they believed God and trusted God. God worked in them in bigger and better ways. Now, the entire 11th chapter of Hebrews sounds like kind of a roll call of the faithful in ancient Israel. Noah started building an ark well before the rains came. It's dry outside. His neighbors must have thought he was crazy. Here comes Noah stockpiling boat supplies and building a huge ark in his driveway. But Noah trusted God even when it didn't make sense. And then the hero Abraham is named. When God said to pack up and move everything and everyone in his household, Abraham packed up and moved. Why? Because God said so. Pretty plucky. And then God told him that he'd be the father of many nations, but Abraham and Sarah didn't have children of their own. Did Abraham doubt? You bet he did. Abraham tried to work things out by himself first, instead of waiting on God's timing, and the results of that were problematic, to say the least. But in the long run, Abraham trusted that God would make it work. Abraham was a hero of faith because he trusted even when it didn't make sense. And then the book of Hebrews tells us that by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they'd been encircled for 7 days. And by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had received the spies in peace. Those of you who've been part of our Tuesday night Bible study will remember the story of Rahab recently. The rest of you need to go read it. Anyhow, she is regarded as a hero in this account because she trusted the people who came, and more to the point, she trusted their God. So she put her life on the line for them and did them a solid. Okay, so maybe some people aren't so terrible after all. I'm in this Facebook group called Things They Didn't Teach Us in Seminary. It's kind of a never-ending source of amusement to me and Jeff. It's mostly a place for ministers to crowdsource for ideas and learn from others' experiences, and occasionally a place for ministers to gripe in private. Jeff and I never have anything like that to say. But a few months ago, someone posed the question to the group, what is your biggest challenge in ministry? And the answers poured in one after another. People who come to me with anonymous complaints saying, a lot of folks are saying, or people who threaten to stop giving if we don't sing their favorite hymn next Sunday, or people who threaten to stop coming if we ever sing that hymn again, or people who, you get the idea. So I commented, looks like we could shorten all these posts by simply saying, my biggest challenge in ministry is people, period, full stop. And I'm not saying that's not true. What I will say, though, is that doing ministry requires you to love people. And I do. With all of our quirks and mistakes and failings, I love people. In particular, I love the people of MCC Toronto almost as much as I love my cats. And thankfully, so does God. Actually, God probably loves you more than God loves my cats. In spite of the fact that this list from Hebrews is not necessarily an inventory of all the best people in the Bible, these people had problems, they messed up, but what they also did was trust God, and they relied on that trust to help them to do good to people around them. And sometimes just that is heroic. Taking a leap of faith to help someone else out, even when we don't see anything in it for us, even if it costs us something. All those heroes of faith looked to God for guidance, looking beyond what they could see into what they chose to believe. And all of these heroes trusted even when it didn't seem possible. Hebrews 11 says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So faith is acting on what God has promised, even when it doesn't look promising. It's clinging to God, knowing that even when we don't see God, God is there. Faith is building a boat when God says, get ready. Faith is moving everything you have to follow God's call. But faith can also be acted out in much more subtle ways. For a child, faith can be a quiet prayer for safety while in bed as the daylight's fading. For a worker, faith can be sticking up for a coworker who's getting an undeserved bad rap. For any of us, faith can be sharing the gifts we have, the things we've been blessed with that will benefit others, like a personal support worker spending a little extra precious time to comfort a patient, like a teacher who goes out of their way to help a struggling student, like perhaps picking up groceries or making a little extra food for a neighbor, like just calling and checking in on someone you think might be lonely. We may not all make it into the hall of faith from Hebrews, but God gives us the faith, the gift of faith, and then uses that to empower us to do good things. And incredibly, people do. I've said it many times during this whole COVID pandemic thing that this has brought out the worst in people and the best in people. And I have been in absolute awe of the folks who, in spite of chaos and uncertainty and danger and loss, still reach out to help others. People like all the essential workers who keep plugging along day in, day out, firefighters, police, EMT, all frontline workers in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, nurses, doctors, personal support workers, essential employees of all kinds, grocery store clerks, truck drivers, farmers, bus and subway drivers, the folks who clean long-term care homes, all the many, many people who can't work from home, who go to work every day at some risk to themselves, often because they have no choice. And I really want all of those folks to know we see you, we appreciate you, we thank you. You are heroes. You know, turns out that people are pretty terrific after all.